So welcome everybody to Eating California using native plants in your diet and in your garden. My name is Kristen Barker. I'm the Community Education Coordinator here at California Botanic Garden, and I'm very happy to be joined by Antonio Sanchez, who I will hand it off to in just a minute. But before I do, I just want to kind of go over the format of the class a little bit. Since it's a webinar, I encourage you all to use the Q&A throughout the presentation. There'll be points periodically where we can kind of pause and address some of your questions, but hopefully we'll have some time at the end to kind of address any lingering questions at that time. So put your questions in the chat. I also encourage everyone to use put your questions in the Q&A, but I encourage you also to use the chat if you want to kind of connect with your other classmates. You might see in your chat panel, there's a blue bar that says to all panelists or to all panelists and attendees. So if you want to connect with people in the class, I suggest that you switch it to all panelists and attendees. And that way you can kind of connect with each other. Also, we are recording this. So if you have to step away for a minute and you want to come back and make sure you didn't miss anything, it'll be up on the digital content page of the CalBG website. And I usually am able to have that up like relatively soon, definitely by the end of the day on Monday, it'll be up there and you can watch it there. And lastly, I'm sure that Antonio is going to mention a lot of resources and references, and he actually provided some recipe cards. So I'll be sending those things out in a follow-up email. So you'll have those, easily accessible, going on into the future. So don't worry if you don't write down the website perfectly or the author perfectly, you'll have that information after the class in an email from me. So with that, I would like to hand you over to Antonio Sanchez. Antonio is the nursery manager and the volunteer coordinator for the Santa Monica Mountain Funds in the Santa Monica Mountain Recreation Area. He was also previously worked here at the garden when it was Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden as the nursery manager for us at California Botanic Garden. And you may, if you did the Taste Wild, you might recognize Antonio. He was one of our panelists and for the Taste Wild series we did in the fall, and he provided the sage pesto recipe. So that was his brain that brought you the sage pesto. So he has a wealth of experience and knowledge when it comes to native plants, and he's very enthusiastic about native plants in your diet. So I can't imagine a better person to be leading this talk today. So with that, I'm going to hand you over to Antonio. Antonio, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Kristen.
Yeah.
I appreciate you. That introduction, you said you can't imagine somebody better for this talk. Once you hear, I think it's because you haven't heard my talk yet. Once you hear my talk, you'd be like, oh, I could actually imagine quite a few, maybe a few hundred. For those of you who don't know me, Antonio Sanchez, I'm super happy that you guys are here with us today. I have a lot of energy sometimes when I give my talks, especially these Zoom talks, because I can't see you guys, and I'm used to making some really bad jokes. And not that I'm used to laughter, but I'm used to people's face when they don't have laughter. So I can't really see that. So there's not really an emoji that you guys can send me or like a text that you can send me that says that's a bad joke, I'm not laughing. But I do have a lot of energy, and it's going to calm down in a few seconds after I really get into this. But my goal today is to give you a little history on the native food here in California. It's been here for thousands of years. I mostly want to show you guys how to use native food, native plant food in your diet and in your garden very, very easily. Hopefully every day, if not on a weekly basis. And then there's some cool kind of either harder to grow stuff or a few kind of things that are definitely not for the everyday person that I'd like to talk about. If you guys have any questions, Kristen, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have any questions, they should put them in the Q&A section, correct?
Yeah, go ahead and put them in the Q&A. If you put them in the chat, that's fine too. I'm looking at both, but I can keep track a little bit easier in the Q&A feature. So either one is great.
Oh. And there's my email at the bottom, antoniosanchez@samofun.org. I'll show it a few more times if you guys have any questions. Before I start, especially this class, I definitely have to give thanks to so many people who helped contribute to this class, help make this class possible. One of the most important would be Dr. Naomi Fraga, who's the head of conservation, does a lot of other stuff right there at Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden, now California Botanic Garden. Naomi and I worked on this class together. I was given this class a long time before me and Naomi met, but she helped me kind of show me what PowerPoint is. And PowerPoint for me is still really hard, but I've added to this and taken away since Naomi had. She actually might object to me still using her name. I'm just kidding. She wouldn't. But Naomi was instrumental in helping me, make this PowerPoint. The Chia Cafe are very, very good friends at Chia Cafe who have worked with the Botanic Garden for years now, and are some of the most just kindest and most influential native plant and native food people in Southern California. I encourage you guys to look them up online and to support their work. Local farmers who have been growing this stuff for years. FLORA Nursery, where I first worked up in Northern California. That was the first native plant job I had. I used to work at Theodore Payne, the good people at Theodore Payne. A native plant nursery that I used to have in Ventura County called Nopalito. A good friend of mine and a cousin ran that. Thanks to Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden. I still call you guys Rancho Santa Ana, sorry. And my good friends at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. And probably the most important people to recognize is native people that are alive now and that have passed away, and the generations of knowledge that they've been able to hand down, not just to their own people, but to us as a lot of us as new Californians. They were definitely the first botanists, ecologists, and horticulturists of California. So we owe a huge, Naomi and myself, debt of gratitude to the work that they did and that we build off of.
Hey, Antonio, I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. Can you share your screen? It didn't go up.
Oh, yeah. Am I not sharing my screen?
No, not right now.
Oh, that's horrible. Are you guys just looking at me? Let me see. Let's see, from current slide.
There you are. So
one thing you guys might know about me, if you've met me for more than a second, is that I'm really bad at technology. Was I really not sharing my screen right now? I had this up there, and that was Naomi. That's what I was talking about before. I was just talking forever. And then I had this. Okay, who cares? Keep going. Sorry about that. I guarantee you, Kristen, that's not the last technical difficulty that I'm going to have. I'll have at least 3 more. So before I get started, I want to invite anyone who's interested to email me. There's my email again, Antonio Sanchez at Semifund. We're going to be starting another horticulture training program. This is all free. This is here at the National Parks in Santa Monica's National Recreation Area in Thousand Oaks, where the nursery's at. And a lot of it, the training is in person. So propagation, like cuttings, how to clean seed, how to do landscape maintenance and installation of plants. And a lot of it is online as well. So if anybody's interested, we just ask that if you do commit to this 10-week training program, that you pay us back by volunteering here at the National Recreation Area in Santa Monica's. So there's my email if you guys are interested. I will put this up at the very end again. And this is how today's class is going to go. I'm going to basically show you some very pretty pictures of plants. I usually show you a map as well. I love to show these maps from CalFlora. They help, the blue dots represent, most of these blue dots, I'd say over 95% of them are going to represent where this plant is found naturally, right? I call it native nature or wild distribution. And when you see a plant widely distributed like miner's lettuce, it's usually a good sign that it's very easy to grow in most people's gardens in Southern California. And I'll show you this picture of miner's lettuce, and then we'll go over all the cool stuff about how you would use it, right? Some cool facts that I like what people do, like PowerPoints, and they read everything to you. I don't want to do that. That's why you guys will get this. I sent this to Kristen as a PDF earlier. There's going to be a recording up later, so we can definitely, I can go off every point and read it to you. But what I like to do is, I'm so familiar with these plants, I use it so many times and I love them, that I will tell you kind of the stuff that I really love about it, right? And some little personal tales, that's ridiculous, personal tales of native plants. Anyways, so that's what it's going to look like. I've got 10 plants that I think are very easy to grow, very easy to use in your garden, and that after we're done with this class, you should just immediately go out and plant them. And then there's some other kind of more unique stuff that I like to use. But before we do all that, I got to make sure that we know where we're starting from, that we're all starting from at least kind of the same place. So most of the plants I'm going to recommend today are from California, specifically the Mediterranean part of California. And I need you guys to understand that we're talking about Mediterranean plants. I don't need you to Google or Wikipedia Mediterranean, which is what I did this morning. I'm just kidding, I didn't do that. But the main thing about the Mediterranean regions of the world, and I have been working with native plants for over 15 years. I've been working with native food for basically that long. That's why I got into plants. But before that, I was working on farms and growing my own food. I wanted to be a farmer, right? Um, and most farms I worked on, they plant in March, April, May, right? It's a, whether you're growing European crops or not, it's a very European kind of mindset for planting, right? And there's nothing wrong with that, but the tomatoes and the chiles and all that stuff that we might be used to in Home Depot right now, Lowe's, that stuff is usually planted in March, April, May. California is way different, and it took me a long time, a lot of dead plants to realize that the best time to plant is during the rainy season. And the rainy season for our plants is usually November to about March, right? You could argue that it's usually December 1st to like December 8th nowadays, but it's a very short window. That's when our plants want to get established. So I'm going to encourage you guys to remember that our plants are Mediterranean. And if you treat them like Mediterraneans instead of like annual plants that you would buy at Home Depot, you're going to have a lot more luck. And so just an example, arugula, if I used to give this class in person before, I don't know if you guys remember, before people wore masks, but before people wore masks, I would ask the people in the room, you know, if you had ever heard of arugula, and most people would raise their hand and say yes. And then I would say, okay, 30 years ago, has anybody, you know, it's 1990, anybody heard of arugula, right? 1990. And most people would have no, you know, if they're being honest, only 2 or 3 people would have their hands up. And I would ask them, how did you know arugula? And it's a lot of people either from Europe, European descent, or some foodies, right? Super hardcore foodies, or some people just trying to impress like a new date that they might have met on OkCupid or something. So the point here is that arugula has been used for over 1,000 years. There's some really cool stories of how arugula was used in Europe. It's a European Mediterranean native, right? But there's a history, there's a culture that's been using it for so long. And only till recently has the United States in general, like Trader Joe's, Vallarta, like Albertsons, all these places have started carrying it. But it's been around for a long time, right? And so I like to look at the Mediterranean regions and I fantasize about all the food, all the beautiful plants for ceremony, all the plants for medicine that are in these Mediterranean regions, the 5 Mediterranean regions of the world. So arugula, like I said, is from kind of Italy, that part of the world. Rooibos, which is a tea that a lot of folks are starting to use. Not a lot of folks, but some folks are starting to use now. You can find it in kind of more health food areas, health food stores. What is that? I like to make all these grammatical errors during my talk, and I write them down as I make them. And then I just look, I have a list of like 18 grammatical errors, and they're pretty funny. So I've got 2 already. Anyways, South African tea that obviously has been used for hundreds, if not thousands of years, but now people in the United States, you know, Santa Monica is all of a sudden using it. It's supposed to be the coolest thing, but you know, people have been using it for a long time. Chilean guava, which is a phenomenal landscape plant, a really tasty little berry from the Mediterranean part of Chile, and then the Australian, the whole continent of Australia, well, not the whole continent, but there's an area of in Australia that has a strong, what they call bush food movement. And that's just, you know, building off of the native foods that have been available to native folks in Australia for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And you could do the same thing with quinoa, even if it's not a Mediterranean type area. I could ask the same question 20 years ago, 30 years ago, had anybody ever heard of quinoa? And most people hadn't. And, you know, most people now know what quinoa is, whether we know how to pronounce it or not. Remember the first time you ever tried to say quinoa, if you ever said it, it was a disaster, right? It's still a disaster. Oh, there's another, that's my 3rd one, quinoa, cool. So anyways, but the idea is that this has a history, very tight history with the people of South America, right? And so quinoa, you can see where it's native from. And goji berry, which you can find at Home Depot, and it's a pretty low water food. There's all these low water foods that we're starting to, I guess, quote, discover, which is a horrible word. We're not starting to discover them. We're just starting to use them on a consistent basis here in California. But there's a lot of cool stuff that you can incorporate into your garden that's low water. And so what is from the Americas that we have used in our diet, in our food for a long time? And so you can see the list, North America, huge continent. And really, if you were to go to a store, those are the only plants, the only foods, those 6 that you would consistently find from North America. And we're counting kind of the middle of Mexico all the way up to Alaska as kind of North America. Because because once you hit kind of the FA, like the Mexico City and south, you kind of hit this Mesoamerica area. It's a lot more, the weather changes, a lot more subtropical. There's a lot more foods that we've been using out there. So you can see the two different lists. And so California, if you guys, according to two different stories, you know, Mexico City, Tenochtitlan, where the Aztec Empire was, that was the biggest grouping of native folks, right, in North America. The second biggest grouping, even though it wasn't an empire, right, like Aztec, was California. There was a huge population of native folks here in California. And so you could see all the stuff that either the Aztecs or people working or very close to the Aztecs in central Mexico were using. And so what do we have from California? And you look at the list and it's so depressing. It's sad, the list. What we have is basically alcohol. So wine grapes, we do have two different grapes here in California. Vitis californica, which I'll go over. They're actually one of my plants, and Vitis jordiana, which is the desert grape. Anyways, a while ago, they did used to use the root stock. So they would graft, they would take the native grape and use the root. And then they would put on top maybe a French Chardonnay wine or something they wanted to go in the 1800s because there was more disease resistance and more drought tolerance with the local grape. Not so much anymore, unless you find like a 100-year-old vineyard or someone doing that on purpose now. They have a lot of hybrid root stocks that they're using for those purposes. Same thing with walnut. You can actually still see our native walnut used today for the same thing, grafting. The lower part, the root stock, the part that goes in the ground is the native part, and the part that produces the fruit is on top. And there's various stories about the genetics of both of our California strawberries being used to hybridize some of the strawberries that we actually eat today. So nothing pure, right? Nothing 100% California. These are all kind of like either hybrids or just root stocks or just combinations of, right? Which is kind of sad, knowing that we just had so much life. There is still so much life, but there's just so much activity and so much culture here in California. And I like to think of, you know, my mom's family comes from Northern Mexico. And I like to think of the way I imagine it is in Mexico, a lot of what happened with the native folks, a lot of native folks disappeared in Mexico, but a lot of them became Mexican, right? And depending on who you ask, becoming Mexican is a very general term, but it's kind of blending the native with the Spanish and the other influences, right? And that's how you get Matachin Indian dancers on December 12th, right? That's how you get tortillas being made by hand from corn and from wheat, right? So there's a lot of native traditions in Mexico. They've just blended in. And in California, the story is not as, even though the Mexican story, you can argue, is not very, very nice, but the California story is even worse. It's even more depressing. There's numbers that as many as 90% of California who were living here before there was contact with Europeans died. And so unfortunately, there's still a lot of native folks around, and many of them very still strongly tied to the traditions. But a lot of relocation happened. And so you may have had black oak trees that you were very familiar with. And when you get moved 200 miles away, it's very hard to visit those oak trees again. And you just lose all this stuff that it took hundreds, if not thousands of years to learn, right? And like I said, native folks here in California, a lot of them are still doing very, very good work with their native traditions. And it's just really cool to see the revitalization of a lot of their traditions. But a lot of them, unfortunately, were lost, or you know, stuff was just lost very, very quickly. So that's the depressing part of my talk. Let's talk about the optimistic talk, because we want to be optimistic. So California, as a political state, has over 6,500 plants in it, which is really cool. That's the biggest group of plants in any state in all the United States. So if we're going to find food in any state in the United States, it's probably going to be California. We should be leading the United States in food that's native to our state, right? Over 35%, or about 35%, so a third basically of the plants only occur here in California. That includes stuff in the Channel Islands, maybe like the sequoias or the redwoods. There's so many cool things that only occur here in California. And then on top of that, there's some stuff that's really rare, right? Even if it only occurs here, some of it's just really rare. There's only one spot where it occurs. There might be two populations left. etc. So California is amazing. And so why would we want to promote the use of native foods? There's so many different reasons. And I'll be honest, these 8 are not all of the reasons. And some of you on this talk today might be like, yeah, I don't really care about that. I don't really care about that. I do care about that. You guys might care about all of these. You might be mad that we didn't put other stuff on here. But I think giving this talk, I think it's important to recognize that people are coming at it from different ways. I want to use less water in my garden to produce food. Cool. I want to carry on traditions that my grandparents had. Cool. I want to be a foodie and like be a hipster and grow some cool local plants. Cool. I got you, hipsters. Step right up. We got you. So for whatever reason you have, I'm good. And foraging, to forage or not to forage, is always a very important question we ask ourselves. And it's a long conversation, but basically, unless you have permission to collect from someone's land, you shouldn't be collecting from their land. That's a really kind of confusing statement for me to say because, you know, people got this land taken from them. But unfortunately, there are laws and there are very good people who are working with other people to try to give them access to land. But apart from that, there's some stuff, not necessarily on my list, but there are things out there. There are stuffs out there. That's number 4, stuffs. There are stuffs out there that if you're not careful, they're poisonous, right? It's something that I'm telling you to eat. I won't tell you to eat it, but somebody else might tell you to eat it. And something very, very similar to it, if you're not careful with plant ID, could be very, very poisonous, or you could have an allergic reaction to it. So I just want to make sure that if you're going to be out there collecting weeds or collecting stuff, that you're foraging, just to make sure you know what you're doing, because watch out. Again, none of the stuff on my list is like that, right? So let me transition out into the plants. I want to introduce you guys to one of my favorite websites, CalFlora. You can just type it in, CalFlora. There's an amazing thing called Google now. You can just Google anything. You can Google CalFlora. And one of the best things about CalFlora for my use is these maps that come up. And so let me show you 2 pictures of California. On the left is miner's lettuce, and you can see, that's one of the plants I'll recommend. You can see how wide a distribution, those little green or blue dots, that's how many different areas, usually in the wild or native nature, you can find miner's lettuce. And on the right is NEVIN'S barberry, and most of those are not native. NEVIN'S barberry is only known from just a very few locations, native, right, or wild. A lot of those other ones are actually, I'm not going to call them invasive, it's not really an invasive plant, but they're just seeding out to the wild, or they're in botanic gardens. But both of them are edible, and both of them occur in really, really different areas. And so why am I talking about distribution? For me, when something is grows in different areas, like Fresno, Sacramento, out there by Redding, and then here by Oxnard down into basically Baja, it's a very good chance that it's easy to grow in most people's gardens. A lot of times we pick these plants that are so cool, they're so unique, they only grow from one habitat. When we try to bring them into our house, to our garden, they're really hard to grow. So I'm happy to report that almost everything on my list is super, super easy to grow, and it should be super, super easy to eat. So here's my 10. We got miner's lettuce. Again, you guys don't have to write these down. Kristen will get you a PDF of it. We got recipe cards coming, and the recording too. So feel free to just sit back, whatever you're sipping on this Saturday morning. I know that I'm sipping on mostly vodka in this coffee cup. Actually, it's mostly gone now. But here's what I'm talking about. And so one thing you might notice right away is that almost all of these are perennials. They're trees, they're shrubs, they're things that you should plant once, and you should expect to be around 5, 10, 20 years or longer in your garden. I'm going to recommend very, very few annuals. In fact, I'm just going to talk about one annual. And an annual is a plant that you plant, it grows, it flowers, and then within two months, maybe 4 months, maybe 6 months, it's gone. It may have left seed there, but that exact same plant is not going to come up for you anymore. And we see that happen with like tomatoes, you usually see it with like lettuces, cilantro, those are all annuals. And so I don't really like to plant a lot of annuals for food, just because California is not super, super strong with annuals, or they're hard to come by. They're really hard to find the seed of. So let's get into it. This is the first one, miner's lettuce. I love this plant. My favorite spot to eat it, where I live in Ventura County, my favorite spot to eat it is that we take this hike up to Ojai, right by the, not even Ojai, but just going up to Ojai from Ventura, you can see under the oak trees this time of year where there's rain or even where there's fog, right at the skirt of oak trees is miner's lettuce this time, right? It always has this nice little like wetness to the leaves, right? And it could be a deer maybe just did their business on it. It usually is, it's usually fog or rain, right? That these plants are slightly wet. If you guys have never tried miner's lettuce, I would highly encourage you to try it. It's such an easy to grow and easy to eat, right? That's the important part. Some of these greens, when people recommend you wild greens, you eat them and you're like, oh, am I allowed to tell the person that I don't like this flavor? I don't think anyone can tell you they don't like the flavor of CLAYTONIA perfoliata or miner's lettuce when it's correctly grown, right? There's a small window for when this thing tastes good. And what I mean by small window is probably about a month or two, because it really likes wet, it really likes shady, and that only happens for a few months out of the year. But in your garden, you can actually replicate those conditions during the spring. So a lot of you who are in upland or in hotter areas, it gets really hot really fast. So by May, it's going to be hard to get good tasting miner's lettuce, right? But those of you in cooler areas, you can replicate it almost all summer. And the way I like to do it is I like to plant this by seed into the ground. I don't like to put it in a pot and then transplant it. For whatever reason, it doesn't like being transplanted. But a lot of us will set up our row crops of chiles, of tomatoes, of eggplants, or whatever. There's about 18 inches, maybe 24 inches in between each plant. And as those plants are growing in, they kind of leave a little naked bare spot at the bottom where miner's lettuce is perfect and it's shady, right? You're gonna be watering your chiles, watering your tomatoes. I love putting this in between them and getting a second or third harvest of miner's lettuce. So there's no reason you can't be eating miner's lettuce from December till about May, as long as you're succession sowing it, right? As long as you're sowing it a few times and having it come up. You can cut it and it'll come back again, but eventually, you'll cut it too much and it'll just poop out. But if you do let it finally go to flower and then set seed, if it's happy, it'll usually reseed in your garden, which is really cool. And it'll wait till the cool rains to come back up. So I love using this just fresh. It's the easiest way to use it. You can use it in soups, and I've never done it, but I've heard of people using it for a pesto. It is available from a lot of different areas. I didn't see it on the list this morning from the ranch or the California Botanic Garden, but Theodore Payne might have it, and Larner Seeds up north may have some. So I encourage you guys to buy some of this and try it out. The second one that's super easy to use is,
before you move on, there's some questions about miner's lettuce I thought we could address. So typically, how long does miner's lettuce take to germinate, from germination to harvest? And does it take long to germinate?
No, it doesn't take long at all. So what you want to do is you want to take the seed's tiny, right? And just lightly cover it. The rule of thumb, it's not perfect for every seed, but the rule of thumb for most seed, and it applies for miner's lettuce, is to just lightly bury it, right? You might even bury it with sand because it's so small. You don't want to bury it too far. So maybe if you've buried it more than like half an inch, that could be too deep. So as long as you don't bury it too much, or just leave it on the surface and barely cover it, give it a little bit of water. Make sure you don't wash the seed away, because once the seed is on top, it's very easy to wash away, right? If you bury a tomato seed, it's hard to wash it away. If you leave a miner's lettuce on the top, it's easy to wash away. So if that's a concern, you can just soak it in warm water overnight, right? Then after 12 hours, just rinse, drain the water out. And then you have a warm, kind of like a moist seed that's very quick to germinate. I would say about 3 to 5 days with 60 to 70 degrees. This does not need hot soil. A lot of our like tomatoes and chiles, people start them in greenhouses because they need warmth, right? They're warm weather crops. Actually, they're warm germinating crops. So miner's lettuce germinates in November, December when it's cold outside and it's wet, so they don't need any heat. So very easy. I would just soak it overnight in warm water, lightly bury it, not too hard, and then you're good.
And that's great. So somebody else is asking, can it tolerate heavy soils, like a heavy clay soil?
Yeah, yes, 100% it can. So I'm going to get into my speech. It'll be like a minute speech about heavy clay soils. I really hate that people talk about heavy clay soils too much. Not the person who asked this question, but heavy clay soils are over exaggerated, or that people worry about them too much. The key is to not overwater your heavy clay soil. These guys occur in heavy clay soil It's usually a little bit mulchy or a little bit organic, right? It's under an oak tree where there's nice tilt, we call it. There's a lot of organic material. It's usually in part shade, kind of by extreme. Very rarely is it under like gravelly, like, even though I've seen it there, like chaparral, right? But no problem. So my best advice is if you have heavy clay soil, just water less. It's fine. Just you need to water less. Stop watering so much because it really holds on, especially this time of year. It takes forever to dry out.
Cool.
Is that good?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Great. But there's one last question. So
sure.
If they wanted to grow miner's lettuce, like local seed, when would they be able to collect the seeds like from a field if they had access to
that's a good question. So this one can be a little hard to collect because the seed, the flowers are so small, the seed is so small. If you take a white piece of paper or a white paper plate, the seed's black, so you can see it. Black shows up really beautifully on white. So they flower really quick, and it kind of depends on how hot it is. Rain is gonna. I don't know if you guys had a ton of rain, so this extra rain is going to extend our flowering period, and so we probably won't see seed on miner's lettuce till about May, maybe June. But you want to collect it pretty quick because they can just drop their seed from just hanging out. They dry out really quick. So I would say May, June, be prepared to visit whatever spot you're looking at, and don't say, I did not say you should go to the wild and collect stuff. So the next one is hummingbird sage. This is, you're like, okay, it's a leaf. What are we going to eat on the leaf? So I love this plant. This plant is easily, for me, the easiest to use native for tea, right? I don't really drink that many teas, but people who like teas, it's a very easy to make tea. 2 or 3 leaves of these fresh green leaves, right? With hot water. It's naturally sweet. It almost smells like pineapple sage. If you guys know what pineapple sage is, it has a very tropical smell to it. But the way I really like to use it, the other 2 ways are, me and my family use it in our honeys, in our agave syrups. We'll take about 5 leaves, we'll wash them off and pat them dry. And then we'll take a whole small little bottle of either agave syrup or honey and just blend it up, right? In a food processor for about a minute or 2. Oh, that intensity of pineapple and saginess on pancakes, on fresh tortillas, on ice cream and yogurt, it works so well on so many things. It's so easy to make. And another way I like to use it is, me and Naomi discovered this when we were working at Rancho together, is to fry the leaves. So if you've ever grown hummingbird sage, let me talk about hummingbird real quick. So if you guys are familiar with Rancho Santa Ana, California Botanic Garden, there's a spot at the end of the mesa. You make a loop around the mesa. There's an oak tree at the end of that loop. There's a bathroom out there. And there's an oak tree there that has, dozens and dozens of leaves of hummingbird sage. It almost looks like a ground cover, like a lawn. And they don't water it that often. I'm thinking they water it maybe every 7 to 10 days during the summer. They're not watering heavy because they don't want to water too much for the oak tree. They don't want the oak tree to get sun and oak death syndrome. But if you water hummingbird sage just lightly during the summer, it doesn't go dormant and it stays green all summer. And the green is just a crisp, really good looking plant all year. Where if you go in the wild and you try to find hummingbird sage like in August or September, it's dormant and the leaves are either gone or they're brown and you would not want to taste them. So this is a very easy one to keep active. I just call it actively growing, right? You don't let it go dormant and it doesn't need a lot of water. Out here on the coast of Ventura, Camarillo, Thousand Oaks, you can give it water every 10 days and it's beautiful. It never goes dormant. It's always producing these leaves, so you can always eat it. So to cook the leaves, you take the biggest ones, you wash them, pat them dry, and then you get your oil, whatever canola oil you're using, just a little bit, and then you throw it in there for about 20 to about 30 seconds. You flip it twice with tongs, and then you crack some fresh salt on it. Oh my God, these trust me, Kristen. Naomi, I think, is a hard. She could be hard. She could be a hard judge. It's Naomi's not watching this. So if she likes something, it's good. And Bart O'Brien, who can also be a critic, if he likes it, it's good. And they both really, really like these fried sage chips. I know they're awesome. Not the you got to eat them right away. They don't hold very well for 10 to 15 minutes. They're not good. You want to eat them right away. But it's such a cool snack. And if you're growing a lot of sage, hummingbird sage, it's just so easy to use. I love this plant. One tip I can give you on growing hummingbird sage, please, 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 if you're going to grow hummingbird sage, the first year, sacrifice the flowers, sacrifice the leaves of the plant. I want to encourage you guys to cut the flowers off the first year, because what happens is people take hummingbird sage home and they plant it, you know, like 6 inches apart, 12 inches apart, and then it flowers right away. And they're, oh, that's such a pretty flower, but then the plant wants to be dormant, and it's like, I did my job, I created my seed for the year, I'm not going to grow no more. And if you cut that flower off, what it is, it signals to the plant to keep growing, especially underground, and you'll see the plant spread and be such a healthier colony so much faster if you are just sacrifice those first few months of flowers. The same thing with yarrow. I know a lot of people plant yarrow, which is not a plant I'm talking about today, but yarrow spikes up really quick, and then people love the flower, and then it tries to go dormant. Cut the flower off, set the plant back growing by rhizome, and you'll be so much happier. So the next plant is a mix, right? This is Cleveland sage. I love Cleveland sage. You can cook with Cleveland sage, but I'm not going to recommend Cleveland sage for this. You can see the distribution. Cleveland sage can be a little hard to grow for people. It really remembers where it's from, which is the Cleveland National Forest and Baja, which is really intensely dry, intensely heat. And most of the soils it grows on are really, really slopey, kind of gravelly, like they just wash away. The water's gone really quick. And then purple sage is really easy to grow. I've seen it hedged as a box in front of like a hospital, in the landscape as a hospital. People are just boxing the heck out of it at 3 feet. It takes extra water. And so you combine those two things and you get a really easy to grow plant, which we call Cleveland sage hybrids. A bunch of different names. The one that Rancho Santa Ana or California Botanic Garden is selling right now is Allen Chickering. But they basically all smell, they all grow, and they all taste the same. And what you get is the sweetness of Cleveland sage, but it's muted. It's not as strong as Cleveland sage, and that's the purple sage coming in. And this is the one that I love making pesto with. I know it sounds stupid. My brother he's not a chef anymore, but he used to be a chef in Minnesota and San Francisco, like really, really good cook. And I was like, hey, dude, I think this has a possibility to be a good flavoring, right? Like people use lavender and rosemary. This is basically Mediterranean. This would be a very good herb. And I go, this would be good for pesto. And he's all, yeah, I think it would. It's too strong. So why don't you blanch the leaves? And I go, I don't know what blanching is. What's blanching? He's all, just boil it in water for a minute. I go, dude, why don't you just say that, man? You're from Oxnard. Like, you grew up in El Paso. Why do you have to say blanching? What is all? Now you lived in San Francisco for a few years and you think you're better than me? I'm just kidding. Is my brother on this? I hope he's not. So apart from being a really easy plant to grow, Caltrans uses it. A bunch of landscape companies use it when they do those new kind of those factory homes where they just build a whole neighborhood. I've seen this used recently just as a 5-gallon. It's a really easy to grow plant. It never really pisses you off with its look. It always looks good. Even when you remove the flowers and it goes semi-dormant, it still looks good. It smells great. You can smell this from like 30 or 50 feet away at night or during the day, during the heat. So I just love this plant. They use it in Phoenix to give you an idea of how heat tolerant it is. I've seen it next to a lawn getting way too much water, which would kill a lot of other sages. So very easy sage to grow. And one of my favorites to use, this is the one I use for pesto. If you have native onions, you can use onion instead of garlic. And I sent Kristen the PDF with the recipe for this pesto, or you can also go to the Native Food Symposium website that me and Naomi helped out with, and the recipe's on there as well. Super easy to, look, I'm not a cook, and if I can make it in 15 minutes, you guys can. And it's vegan, so it just takes olive oil, some pine nuts, so really cool plant to use, and one that I love encouraging people to use.
Hey, Antonio, what would you serve your pesto with?
That's a good question. So again, this is a Naomi and Bart. Like, there's some tough cookies. So the easiest way to do it is either on a pizza, on a cracker, or in pasta, right? Like a fettuccine. What me and Naomi did one time at Rancho, right, when I was still working there, we made some saltbush grains. So instead of quinoa, we used saltbush as the rice. And then we had some quail. We got some quail, we put that on top. And then we put the Cleveland sage pesto on top of the quail with the quinoa. Oh,
Wow.
Kristen, we didn't charge enough for that. We should charge more. We were not smart. But
That
trust me,
sounds delicious.
it's so tasty. And I'm not recommending you stuff that like, some people like it. Every person that we have served this to likes it. Ask Naomi, she can verify. Bart is very picky and he loved it. So it's on. This next one is Allium unifolium. Sorry, I just skipped over that picture there. This is one leaf onion. And I don't like to recommend to beginner gardeners, not that everyone on here is a beginner gardener, but I don't like to recommend hard to grow bulbs or corms, right? Stuff that goes to sleep in the ground and then wakes up with the rain, kind of like an onion would do or tulips or whatever. But this one, for whatever reason, doesn't mind being watered during the summer. And that's the problem with some of our corms and bulbs, is that they're used to that Mediterranean climate and they go to sleep during the summer and they don't like water during the summer. In nurseries, we'll actually take those pots and put them in an area that doesn't get water during the summer so we don't accidentally water them. Allium unifolium, for whatever reason, can tolerate being in a garden and being watered. That doesn't mean it's going to be awake. It's not going to grow during the summer, but what it means is it's not going to rot off and you'll have it wake up in November, December. So it's a very easy one to grow. You can either use it from seeds, so you can buy seed online, or you can buy the actual living plant. So the parts to use on this are everything. You can use the bulbs, you could use the chives, what we call, right, the green part, or you can use the flowers. Everything is edible. This one is not as strong as our other wild onions. Some of our wild onions are super strong. They're super garlicky and spicy. This one's not. This one has more of an onion, like mild garlic flavor. So super easy to incorporate into dishes, and one that I love to use in that native, that pesto. And it's really cool. If you live in a milder climate, like 80 degrees or less during the summer, you can have it in full sun, no problem. If you're going to be in a much hotter area, like Upland can be, like Claremont can be, I'd recommend it in part shade. I love to use it where hummingbird sage is, right? In part shade, you're watering hummingbird sage a little bit extra during the summer, and this guy will not rot out. It'll come right back during November or December. It's a really pretty combination with hummingbird sage. Love this plant. The next one is PROSOPIS glandulosa, which is honey mesquite. This one may not be for everybody to grow, but it should be for everyone to eat. So you can see the distribution. And the reason it's not for everyone to grow is that this is a really strictly desert plant. This guy remembers 95-degree summers or more, and very rarely does it know fog. If it's fog, it's usually from a river, and it doesn't happen like we get in coastal California. I've seen it get powdery mildew too close to the beach and not reliably produce fruit or pod too close to the beach. But if you're in Upland, if you're in Riverside, if you're in these Temecula, Rancho Cucamonga, these areas by Rancho that are really hot, this plant is amazing. It does have spines, and there are nurseries, especially in Arizona, that are developing spineless or thornless mesquite. Mesquite's been growing in the Southwest for probably thousands of years now. You can see crosses made out of it. You can see fences made of it. But what we're interested in is the pods that fall from it, right? There's usually two crops of pods, one in the desert region and one after the monsoons. So usually the best one is the one from monsoons. So this is going to get a little complicated as far as how you harvest this, how you process it, but it's not complicated on how you eat it. So if anybody has any questions on how to collect it, how to process it, I think we should cover that maybe in the Q&A, because this is something that you need to kind of commit to, right? And there are mold issues that can happen if you let it rain or if it's too foggy. But what I want to encourage people to do is to get into this desert food. There's entire books from, this book is from Tucson, from a nonprofit group, I think called Mesquite Harvesters or Desert Harvesters. They have dozens of recipes online on how to use mesquite. We use it for tortillas. We use it for pancakes. You can use it in mole as a chocolate substitute. So it has a slight carob or chocolate flavor to it. It's a flour, right? When it's ground up, it produces this meal or this flour. The only negative I think that would have is that it's sweet. And so some people don't like necessarily the sweetness that it has. And it doesn't have that gluten, so it doesn't taste bread. And so what we usually do is half and half, or there's various recipes on how to use it to make pancakes or to make tortillas. You usually use 2 parts flour, 1 part mesquite, or if depending on what ratio you're looking for. In that recipe card that I sent to Kristen, the way that my family uses it the most is cookies. We use these vegan cookies, or make these vegan cookies with cornmeal, so maseca, right? So corn that you would use for corn tortillas, and mesquite. And so you get the really nice kind of the corniness, is that a word? Hold up, that's number 5. Corniness of maseca, and you get the sweetness of the mesquite, and it's like this light chocolate corn flavor. And then we put pine nuts and chia in it. Oh, they're so good. They're so easy to make, guys. They're so easy. If I can make them, you can make them. They don't take very long to make. They're fun to make with your kids or whoever. If there's people in your house that aren't your kids, I don't know, what are they doing in your house? Wait, that's number 6. Why do you have kids in your house that aren't your kids? Okay, so anyways, super easy to make, very fun to eat. They last for a long time, etc. I love using this. There's my secret in Upland. There's a row of them by this smoothie shop by what's that? By Chipotle right there on, I think it's where it used to be Route 66, and they just fall to the ground. And I used to collect them, and you just snack on them. They're sweet. You can just eat them like that. But if you want to make a meal out of them, you should really get a heavy duty, like an industrial grade grinder, because this is a very hard seed to grind. It's almost like a lupin seed. It's just really tough to grind it up. So there are some issues there, but I would encourage you guys to buy some online. There's some various resources right there, and start using mesquite because it's an awesome food. Let's get into the fruits, some berries. The easiest one maybe just the most that people would recognize the most are California grapes. Now, I do not like VITIS californica for people's homes. I think it's a great plant. But when it goes dormant, it kind of has this yellow leaf. It's not the prettiest. And the fruit is good, but it's not amazing. And then there's Vitis Georgiana, which is the desert grape, which to me is even less impressive. I hate talking about plants like they're not impressive. This is a tough plant. This grows in the desert in like 6 inches of rain, and it produces fruit every year. That's amazing. So there you go, Vitis Georgiana. I could see your feelings were getting hurt. What I'm going to recommend for people to grow is a beautiful plant in your landscape, and then a really sweet fruit. This is a hybrid of 2 different grapes. One is California, and then one is I forget what part of Europe this wine grape is from. I think it's a champagne grape called Alicante Boucher. I'm just going to write that down because I know I didn't pronounce that correctly. That's number 7. So what you had in, I believe it's Sonoma County, Roger Reich, who's a really amazing horticulturist, native plant guy up in Northern California, saw probably about November or December, this was years ago, he saw by probably one of the rivers out there, this wild grape. And when it went dormant, when he saw it when it was going dormant, it was this brilliant red. And he got out of his car and he noticed that this was different. This plant was intense. And so he's been growing it, and people around California grow it for landscaping as Rogers Red, named after him. The red because when it goes dormant, the leaves are this intensely red. It's really pretty, but the fruit is really sweet too. And I think part of it is because it comes from this wine. It's a half, it's a mix of the California grape and then this wine grape that's been around for over 100 years. So it's easy to eat. It produces tons of fruit. Even the maybe not the first year. I've seen it produce fruit the first year, but definitely by the second year. And it grows big, right? So you can use this to cover like an arbor. You could use it to cover like a mountain probably. It's huge. 20 to 30 feet is not uncommon for Rogers Red in 1 year. Sounds like a lot, but what it does is drops out its leaves. And just like you might see in any other vineyard, you could cut it back to about 3 or 4 feet every year and then let it grow out, right? So this is one that I love growing. This is probably the easiest to grow native fruit. Kids love it. It does have seeds, right? So if you're not into seeds, then I don't know what I have for you. Everything that I'm going to recommend has seeds. So you might have to just log out of this class. I'm just kidding. Don't log out of this class. So the next few fruits I think are super interesting because they remind me and Naomi of a story about blueberries, right? Blueberries are native to California, to northern. Well, there's different types of blueberries, but the blueberry in this story is native to the Northeast. And there was definitely native folks already eating and working with those blueberries way before European folks came in. But this story is about a European botanist, Frederick Colville, who was widely respected as a botanist, really did some really cool work out in the Northeast. But he saw and knew about this blueberry, and he saw how sweet they were naturally. And he put this call out to folks in the Northeast that he wanted to try to cultivate to grow in farms blueberries. And this woman, Elizabeth White, heard his call And she got her neighbors and really the people around her area, right, for hundreds of miles to send to her cuttings of the stuff that was the sweetest, right? So she had a collection of the sweetest blueberries and the easiest to grow, growing them and seeing which would take in cuttings. Long story short, after just about 5 years of putting their minds to it, they were able to start basically marketing to farmers this easier to grow, bigger, tastier blueberry without much hybridization, right? There wasn't really hybridization going, there was just selection going on. The reason I bring this up is because native folks have been doing this for hundreds, if not thousands of years. A lot of it, unfortunately, was lost. A lot of it's still around now. What we can do is start to do that with our fruits. And one that I think is super easy is golden currant. If you guys have never used golden currant, it's my go-to fruit for you to try native berries. So if you think about golden currant, if you guys know California Botanic Garden or Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden, this grows everywhere at the garden. It's by the parking lot where the staff parks. It's all in the fence line. It's everywhere in the desert section. And there's some that are tastier than others, right? You can taste the difference. Some are sweeter, some are not as sweet. Some of it has to do with the soil. Some of it has to do with the rain that was there that year, but they're all genetically different. They're all individuals. And what happens when we eat fruit is usually we're eating from one specific plant. We're eating from a clone. All navel oranges in the world came from one tree. So, you know, Roma tomatoes are all one seed strain, right? That's how they get Roma. That's how they're, anyways. So when you buy ribes aureum, you don't really know what you're buying in the store. And just to let you know, right now, Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden or Cal Botanic Garden, the nursery has this for sale. So I would encourage you guys to go buy some. This is such, everyone I've ever showed this plant to and given them some fruit of really likes this fruit. It's so easy to eat. It's very easy to harvest, which is an important thing. And it's easy to grow. It grows in full sun. It grows in part shade. It grows in clay. It grows in sand. The only thing I would recommend is that you guys try to plant at least 2, if not 3 of these, right? The yield or the harvest is a lot less when there's just one plant hanging out and there's no other ribes to cross-pollinate. It doesn't need to cross-pollinate, but for whatever reason, the harvest is always bigger when there's more than one plant around. And it's a really beautiful plant. It flowers very early, usually in December or January, and then the fruits come kind of early too, in April or May. So it's one of the first fruits in California, and you can use it however you want. You can use it fresh. You could probably make wine out of it, and then you could probably, I've never made jams out of it. We eat them just as quick as we can harvest them. But again, Rancho's selling this, and I would really encourage you guys to try this. And there's tons of native berries to try. There's barberries, there's more rye berries, like gooseberries and currants. There's rubus, which is all the blackberry family. There's fragaries, which are all the strawberries. I want to talk just a little bit more about a few that I really like. This map right here is of California, Vaccinium, ovatum, which is huckleberry. Some of you, if you spend any time in Oregon or Washington or Vancouver, might be familiar with huckleberry. Huckleberry grows wild up in those mountains. This is the distribution of huckleberry. You can see where it grows, and it's pretty far north. And then once you hit about San Luis Obispo or Santa Barbara, it really drops off quickly, right? And that's San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara. It seems to be like it's a transitionary, right? Like the rain stops, and we're like, nope, we're going to be basically desert now. So, but I love this even better picture right there. You can, I love using this in gardens because it's such a pretty plant. A lot of people have these part shade areas where they don't know they don't know how to landscape. They need a 2 to foot, 2 to 3, 2 to foot. There we go, 2 to foot. There's 8. I tell you, Kristen, I'm almost at my 14. So there's they want a 2 to 3 foot wide plant, but they want it to get tall. They want it to get 5 or 7 feet. Guess what? I got your plant, Vaccinium ovatum, part shade. It loves part shade. It grows in like redwood forests. The only thing it needs that we don't have in most Southern California gardens is slightly acid soil. It doesn't need as acid a soil as you might need for blueberries. If you ever tried growing a blueberry, they'll probably try to sell you like an azalea mix to put in the ground, or like peat moss so it doesn't need, it does like that, but it doesn't need that, right? So I would amend it when you plant it with some azalea mix in the ground, but it doesn't need a consistent mix like some of the blueberries do. And again, with this one, just like blueberries and just like currants, if you can plant more than one, you're always going to get a much, much bigger harvest. You guys ever grown blueberries and you only have one and you wonder why you don't have any blueberries? It's because they're self-fertile, but they want to cross-pollinate. They want to be around other blueberries, right? So a great plant for a pot, a great plant for a wine barrel. If you're going to do wine barrel, you could probably shove 3 in one wine barrel and get your cross-pollination that way. Again, my best way to use it is in those part shade areas that are narrow, but you need something tall, about 4 to 6 feet. And it works well under pine trees too, because the pines, as they drop their needles, acidifies the soil a little bit, and they love that area. And you can expect a kind of a midsummer harvest for this one. Really cool plant and a very beautiful plant too. And Mexican elderberry, I want to give you guys one. If we don't leave with anything else, stop saying that elderberries are not edible when they're raw. All that information is coming from Europe, and the European ones for sure have a little bit of nastiness in them. You do not want to eat them when they're raw, but that's all the literature from there. This is a whole different plant. It's the same genus. It's very closely related, but this one people have been eating raw for centuries, if not thousands of years. There's a farmer from Bakersfield who sells this at the Santa Monica Mountain or at the Santa Monica Farmers Market when it's in season, and he sells them raw, right? And he's not killing all of his customers. That would be a really cool story if he was, but it's good raw. But I think what people use it for most is for syrups, for pies, for baking, for making jams and whatnot. So while I'm never blown away with the flavor of elderberry raw, if you've ever grown an elderberry, look at all these flowers. All these flowers produce berries, and there's thousands of berries on these plants. And that's the reason why the insects and the birds love them. And you may have to put a net over individual flower clusters or over the entire parts of the entire tree to keep birds from eating them, because they love them. If you can get around that, there's thousands of berries per tree every year. Again, they're self-pollinating, they're self-fertile. You only have to plant one, but if you can afford to, or you have the space to, it's best to plant more than one. And this is so easy to use just raw, or to cook down into jams or jellies or using pies. If I had my wish and everyone in Southern California could only plant one tree in their yard, it would be elderberry, because it's such a good plant for pollinators. People use it for music, people use it for medicine, and we use it for food. It's just such a beautiful plant. So I would encourage you guys to try elderberry. Super easy to grow, takes clay soil. It's best in full sun, but it can tolerate part shade. If you have part shade, you might not get as much berry production. And that's kind of true across the board for most fruits. And then toyon. Toyon, if you guys have ever tried to eat toyon, you'd probably be questioning why you're taking this class right now, because toyon probably does not taste good to most people. And I agree. Even when it's the best, it's like, that's not that good. But there's thousands of them. And I love trying to figure out a way how to use 1,000 of something. So toyon in plain yogurt with some of that hummingbird sage honey I told you about, and some toyon berries. The slight bitterness of toyon gets cut by the milk right in the yogurt, and then you add sweetness with the honey. Oh, it's so good. And what an intern of mine, the guy I used to work with, made us last year was toyon jam, and it looked disgusting. It looked like brown orange and something like you would not want to eat, but it was some of the tastiest stuff we had ever had. And so I love toyon. This is the second plant apart from elderberry that I would love to see in all landscapes in California. And it produces a fruit at a different time than elderberry. Elderberry is in summer, toyon is in the winter. It flowers at different times, so you're attracting different pollinators. And you can keep these plants pretty small. I think a lot of people see them at 20 feet. They think they have to be kept at 20 feet. They can easily be kept at about 6 to 10 feet if you're pruning them, right? And it's a very easy plant to grow. There's somebody hedging it, keeping it as a small hedge. But I would encourage you guys to try this out. The easiest way for me to use it is in yogurts when it's fresh, right? But I've heard of people using it like in trail mix, drying it out using a trail mix, or like my friend used as a jelly or a jam. And I just want to encourage you guys to think about the plants that we're using and that we're talking about. I think a lot of people, when they plant in their garden, they think that they don't realize that a lot of these plants have been in our areas for thousands of years, and they don't need much from us. Apart from the or the huckleberry that I just told you guys, that is kind of a unique one that is really from slightly acid soils and kind of like a little bit more like of a rainforest effect. Everything else is basically from a Southern California climate, which is rain during the winter, dry during the summer. And so we don't need to give these plants a lot. And I like to bring the story of Ishi, and I don't mean any disrespect to Ishi, but Ishi, a lot of folks, or some people call him the last wild Indian. I hate that term, but he was, from what people say in the early 1900s, one of the last or the last wild native person in California. His tribe, his family had died and been killed off, and a sheriff found him. This is north of Sacramento, and this is early 1900s. And they took him to San Francisco to live with an archaeologist, and the archaeologist, gave him a job, even though his issue was probably what's a job, but he gave him a job. He cut his hair and he put on these Western clothes, but they became very good friends. And Ishi and the archaeologist went to Ishi's homeland, and the archaeologist said, I want to see how your people used to live, how you guys, what you do. And Ishi didn't have to ask where to find medicine. He didn't have to ask where to find food. He just knew, right? He would have been better if he had 5 or 10 people with him to help collect, right? To do all these things. But the point is that when you're from a place for so long, you know a place. And these plants that I'm recommending for you guys, toyon, elderberry, hummingbird sage, one leaf onion, the Cleveland sage hybrids, these are all plants that have been here for a long time. And when you plant them in the ground, they need almost nothing from you. And so the more fertilizer and the more water you try to give them, the more you're going to hurt them. It's almost like going to Ishi and saying, like, would you like a pizza? Would you like a beer? Ishi would probably be like, once a month, he would love a pizza. He would love a beer. But once you start bringing Ishi a pizza and a beer every day, which to me, I equate with, I was about to say equivalate. That's number 9. So I equate too much water as too much beer and too much pizza. And it happens across the world with people that have been in a culture, been in one place in a diet for one time. It happens to Mexican folks, happens to Black folks, happens to Native folks. When we get introduced to a Western diet really quickly, we see disease happen. And the same thing happens with plants. I'm not trying to make light of plants and people. We're not the same, but we do have a lot of similarities. And when we start watering too much, a plant that for thousands of years has only had water for 5 months during the winter, our plants start to freak out. When we start to give them too much nutrients, too much fertilizer, our plants start to freak out. They don't know what to do with it. So I would like to encourage you to think of your plants as Ishi, and you're visiting them, and they really only need a little bit of what you're bringing, right? And so I have a bunch of gardening tips that I would like to cover at the very end after I answer some questions. But these gardening tips, I think, will help you out when you're trying to figure out why your native plants are not looking good or why they're dying, which is the question I probably get asked the most, like, how do I stop killing my plants? There's some other cool plants that are super, super interesting. I'll just cover a few very quickly. I think one that Rancho or California Botanic Garden has that I wish I had is this hybrid. So Burberry Vinia is NEVIN'S barberry. It's a really sweet berry right off the bush. It does have a lot of seed though. So that one's cool, right? And then there's Berberis aquifolium. This one produces a ton of berries, but they're not sweet. They're actually really, really sour. So why am I'm not recommending these two, even though me and Naomi have made jam out of Berberis aquifolium. It's really good. What I'm recommending for you is one is a hybrid that Rancho Santa Ana has in its garden. It's a combination of Berberis aquifolium and Berberis nevinii. And it's seedless, which is really cool. So those people who complain about seed, that you have nothing to complain about anymore. It's a gorgeous, handsome shrub. It's in the experimental garden. If anybody wants to check it out, I would just go to the visitors and go ask where the experimental garden is. You actually can't enter the experimental garden, but it has just a chain link fence and you can see through it. There's no covering on it. So you can just see there's about 5 plants all next to each other, unmaintained. I remember when Bart O'Brien showed me, he's the one who showed them to me. It's such a sharp, gorgeous looking plant. I couldn't believe they hadn't been watered in years. They were just surviving on their own. It looks really good and it produces these crops of fruit that are really, really tasty. They have no seed. So that's one that's really, really cool. And Rancho is the only one that has. Another one that I like to use is Atriplex lentiformis, which is saltbush. A saltbush is a relative of quinoa and amaranth. And so there's a picture of the saltbush fruits, and inside is the seed. And so just compare it to the quinoa. So I'm too lazy to break these fruits open. What I've done in the past is take a bunch of these fruits. They're very easy to harvest. You just pull them off the plant and you can soak them like you would in a quinoa. You would cook them just for a little bit longer, a quinoa. It takes a little bit of finesse to figure out exactly how to cook them. But when you cook them correctly, they soften up like quinoa and then actually salty. They call them saltbush for a reason. So I've used this as a grain substitute, and I love using it as a grain substitute to introduce people into a little bit more unique native foods. But the easier way to use them is to just use them dry like this, and I toast them or parch them on a dry pan. And so you have these lightly roasted salt seeds, then you can eat just crunchy like popcorn, right? And if you squeeze a little bit of lime on top, it's so good. I believe that Abe Sanchez had, I think in the Taste of Wild, he used this. I, I, I love this seasoning. I think it's one of the coolest seasonings that we have in California, but I love using the fruit or seed in it too, right? And it's a very easy plant to grow. The only negative is that you need a female and a male plant, right? They're different. They have different sexes on the plants, and so you need both to produce fruit. Um, and then one that Rancho has in their desert section, and they will sell occasionally, is oregano or Aloysia rhydi. It's a lipia. It has this very citrusy oregano flavor to it that me and Abe love using like on pizzas, in pestos, in pastas. It's such an easy to use herb. It's not the prettiest plant. It's a desert plant that really goes dormant when there's no rain. But it's a very, very tasty plant. So it's one that I like using. I know Chia Cafe does too. There's native chia, which I think is a really cool plant to grow. But I'll be honest with you, if you're trying to grow your own chia, you probably want to try to grow Salvia hispanica because it's much easier to grow. But if you're trying to grow California, I would try to grow the native chia. This is available right now through California Botanic Garden. They're selling it at their nursery. And it's a lot different than this, which is what they grow in Australia right now. Any chia that you've ever bought is probably this non-native Mexican chia. It's still great. It looks almost exactly the same as a seed, but the plant is way different. Ours, I'm gonna go back a picture. Ours is tiny. It can be sometimes 3 inches tall, up to like 2 feet tall, depending on the soil, depending on the rain that year. But they're really cool to harvest. And I would encourage you guys to go online onto YouTube and just type in California chia harvest. And there's a cool video with Abe taking a tennis racket and harvesting some chia in the field. So there's a more traditional way, not really the bucket, but the beater of how to collect chia. And it really is hard to find. So I would encourage you guys to grow your own from Rancho Santa Ana, because you can see the price difference. You can buy a pound of Salvia hispanica chia for about $1 or $2. Nowadays it's so cheap, and the native chia is at about $120 a pound, and it's really hard to find. So there's some cool stuff to look at. Lycium is another cool one. This is related to goji berry. So we have one that occurs on the Channel Islands, and it's out into Baja. It's such a cool little fruit. The fruits are tiny. You're not gonna like make a whole meal out of them, but it's a cool little shrub. Very easy to grow, kind of desert hedge shrub that you can just pick fruit off of. And then pine nuts. I don't think anyone here is going to grow a pine nut, but there are millions of pine trees in California that at this time are not being harvested for pine nuts. And most of our pine nuts come from China. And so I think there's a lot of interesting work, especially like on BLM land, that could be done with harvesting our local, right? Our true local pine nuts. And some even wackier things like purslane. Purslane is a weed, but there's genetic evidence. Some of the work was done at Rancho Santa Ana that we see that some of the purslane, not the stuff in people's gardens, but the stuff actually out past Bishop in kind of the Big Bear area, there's some purslane over there that genetically is different than the stuff you find in common gardens. And so they're thinking that it's probably been here for thousands of years. And if that's the case, then we can say that that purslane is native, which is a really cool story. But purslane is probably the highest, if not one of the highest plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids. It's such a healthy plant. So that's a cool story there. I know me and Naomi had dreams of trying to go find some seed and trying to like promote it as a native food. And then there's Slim Jim bean, which is related to tepary bean. Tepary bean is a very healthy, drought tolerant bean that you can get one crop up out of one rain during the summer, which is amazing. In Sonora and Arizona, they can get, you know, a crop of beans from just one rain. And we do have something very similar. The last time they saw it in Riverside was about 30 years ago. And that's something that me and Naomi May one day will try to go find, rediscover that spot to see if that plant's still there. And then one that's at Rancho too, I don't know if they sell it or not, but these bulbs, these corns on these golden burdea, me and Naomi used to get and use them as potatoes. And they're about maybe the size of quarters. And so we used to put Cleveland sage with these potatoes and our onions, and we would have like a side dish of potatoes, and they were so good. The only reason I wouldn't recommend them on a big scale is because they're kind of hard to grow. They really do need to be at least not as wet as that one leaf onion. So they like to be asleep during the summer, but they're really cool. And occasionally the nursery might sell them. And so what would a farmer's market look like on native foods, right? On the left is the fresh stuff. So we've got the miner's lettuce, we've got possibly the purslane. You can eat saltbush greens fresh. You can eat hummingbird sage leaves fresh. There's all these fresh fruits that could be around during different times of the year, and herbs as well. Oregano, elderberries, blackberries, onions, potatoes, etc. The baby potatoes, right? The ones I just talked about. And on the right is prepared stuff that you would prepare back in a kitchen and then sell like in containers, like roasted saltbush seasoning, like we tried at the Eating Wild, dried sage and dried oregano, or the sage pesto would be fresh. Manzanita cider is fairly easy to make. I don't put manzanita on cider on this list because a lot of people find manzanita very easy to kill, very hard to grow. And by the time it fruits, it's usually dead in your garden. But if you can find a full-grown fruit-producing manzanita cider, it's pretty easy to make. Mesquite baked goods like the cookies I mentioned, tortillas. There's a woman in Tucson who's making mesquite tortillas, and she's making a pretty good living doing that. And then so I always imagined that Rancho would have a native food garden, a 1 acre or a quarter acre native food garden. And so what would those gardens look like? You could have vineyards of native grapes. You could have row crop styles, right, of like onions and greens like miner's lettuce. You could have hedgerows like elderberries on the side. There's a lot of cool stuff, I think, that for someone who wants to put a little bit of time and be visionary, I think would be really cool to accomplish. And just a few different resources for you guys. Chia, there's a new cafe about a year and a half, started about a year and a half ago, Cafe Oloni in Berkeley. They're only open, I don't know how they're doing during COVID, but they were only open a few days a week, and they were serving very, very limited small dishes of ultra local food run by some native folks up there. And it sounded like a cool story. I hope they're still going. The second point there is 3 plants to buy. If you are interested, I would go to the Botanic Garden or the nursery and order them online and get the golden currant, the hybrid allium chicory and sage, and then packets of chia. And then one that's not on this list that isn't in my presentation, but one that you guys have for sale right now at the garden is woodland strawberry. I love woodland strawberry as a ground cover. It's such a cool ground cover. It doesn't produce a lot of fruit, and the fruits are small, but it's a cool snack. But it's a really cool ground cover. If you guys ever walk through Rancho or California Botanic Garden, under some of those oaks, they have really nice patches of strawberry as a ground cover. So it's a really easy to grow, nice plant. There's a bunch of different books and resources here. Maybe the one I'll point out is in the middle, Agave Roast from Malky Museum. Malky Museum, they're very tight friends. A lot of them are in Chia Cafe. And before the pandemic, they used to invite folks out to the reservation, out by the casino out there, I believe by Morongo, just about an hour and a half from Rancho. And they would open up their area and they would roast agave and they would invite anybody. And I think it's a really cool way of combining just so many different people and so many different interests and starting to have a respect for like annual food, right? And the agave roast is something that you only eat once a year when it's ready. So I would encourage you guys to look at their website. They have some really cool videos, some really cool stories about agave roasting. And just to thanks again to mostly to Native folks who have helped me personally, and then who have, you know, carried on these traditions. Dr. Fraga, who works at the Botanic Garden, our good friend Jessica Orozco, who passed away a few years ago, Chia on the other side, we say. And my challenge to you, if you're interested, and I hope you are because you paid for this class, is that you try to get some of these plants in your life. If you can afford this class, you can probably afford to buy a few of these plants. And there shouldn't be a reason you can't get one of these in your life once a week. And what that leads to is a tradition, right? That's the beginning of a tradition that you can pass on to your kids, to your loved ones, or to your hated ones. And that's how we become Californian again, right? Is to start eat what is here. And so I would love to see a lot of that start happening. There's some extra photo credits. And again, all this stuff we can provide, or hopefully Kristen will provide you on a PDF. And this is being recorded so you can check it out. And I just want to invite anybody who's interested to come join some trainings. And if you are, just give me an email, we'll check it out. And with that, I think we can check out any questions you might have, Kristen.
Yeah, we have a lot of great questions. Thanks, Antonio. This is amazing. I think people are very interested and they want some follow-up. So I'm going to try to get to some of the species questions. So do you know if golden currant will cross-pollinate with any other ribes varieties?
Oh, that's such a good question. I have not seen golden currant cross-pollinate. I've grown it in plenty of different scenarios with other ribes. So just to be clear, there's two. I'll try to not talk so much. This kid can talk. So there's gooseberries, which have spikes on them, and the fruits usually have a little bit of spikes on them. And then there's currants, which are ribes, but they don't have any spikes. I've never seen the gooseberries hybridize with the currants, right? So that's no problem. So if you have ribes speciosum, which is gooseberry, or fuchsia flower currant, or fuchsia flower gooseberry, that shouldn't cross-pollinate with golden currant or hybridize. I do know that I mean, especially because a lot of Europeans, not our native currants, but a lot of European folks still eat currants from Europe. I know that there's a lot of hybridizing there. They try to get bigger fruits, but I have never seen golden currant hybridize with any of the other ones. Golden currant's kind of unique. If you guys know, I don't want to talk too long, I mean, unless you guys care, but if you guys know golden currant, it's really unique among our currants. It doesn't really look like most of our other currants. They're either gooseberries, right, which are currants, or they're like ribes malvaceum or ribes sanguineosum, which have these like little kind of like hairier leaves, and they're just like bigger. They just look different, and that's not a very good trait to go off of. But on this one, I've grown enough to know. I don't think those guys are going to cross. So I don't think there's any chance of crossing like pink flowered currant with golden currant. I've never seen it.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any, like, what about native sunflowers? Do you have any recommendations for that? Or
yeah, so the native sunflowers are super easy to grow. I don't know how many sunflowers there are, and that's where it gets a little tricky when you use common names and then scientific names. So let's be clear, I'm not talking about Encilia californica, which is like California sunflower. We're talking about the true Helianthus, which is what people would eat like as a sunflower seed. So Helianthus annuus is native to Southern California. It's probably native to California. It's also native to like the Midwest. It's everywhere. I'm saying it's easy to grow. The seed is small though, and you might be disappointed if you're used to like what I'm gonna call like regular or basically domesticated sunflower seeds. So that's probably the easiest to grow, that produces the most seed. But if you're gonna use your space to do that, I would probably encourage you to use it on something that would be a little bit more unique, a little bit more productive, like half of the stuff on this list, because they do get big when they're growing. A sunflower can get like 5-6 feet tall, maybe even taller, and then pretty wide too. Right. But it's a beautiful plant. Pollinators love it. So if you're looking for that, then you're good.
Yeah. So, and you kind of mentioned how does Sambucus nigra compare to Sambucus mexicana?
So that's the same plant. It's
oh,
the
really?
same. Yeah. I'm sorry if it's confusing, but so they just switched the names, right? Oh. So I believe and you can blame people like Naomi for that. Oh, why am I talking on Naomi right now? She should be here if I'm going to say that. So it's a lot of scientists do the DNA work, and they figure out that this is actually this, or they want to rename it. So Sambucus mexicana, I believe, does not exist anymore. It's not a name that anybody uses. I mean, I still use it, but scientifically, it's not a name that's actually used. That Sambucus mexicana is now Sambucus nigra cerulea, something like that. And so that's the common or the real name. And if you went to the Botanic Garden, Bryce is probably labeling it as Sambucus nigra.
Okay.
5 years ago, it was probably Sambucus mexicana.
Okay. Okay. That clears that up. And then, so you mentioned the Oregon grape. Can that grow as a bush, or is that more of like a vining grape?
All right, that's a great question. And I'm assuming that some of you, even though I saw like Berkeley, I think I've seen a lot of folks who maybe don't have access to Rancho, to California Botanic Garden, but at least some of you may have gone to, and the person from Berkeley has probably sees Oregon grape maybe all the time in there. So Oregon grape is not a vine, it's a shrub. It's a really pretty shrub. When it's grown correctly, it's really nice. There's a lot of real nice berberis aquifolium at the garden, and they're flowering right now. They're very early flower. So January sometimes, usually like February, March, these beautiful sprays of yellow. And then after the sprays comes a pretty early fruit. So no, it's a shrub. It's a fairly easy to grow shrub. The aquifolium is. NEVIN'S is really easy to grow too. And I didn't grow that other hybrid I told you guys about. We did do it from cuttings, but we never grew it in the garden except for the experimental garden that I told you about.
Okay, great. And so someone is interested in making bitters, like flavored liquors or liqueurs. Is there a plant that you can think of that would work with,
Oh, I got a lot of plants. Yeah, that's a great question. So I've never made bitters before. As a person, I'm pretty bitter. Oh my God. So Kristen, I felt that one coming 5 seconds ago, and I tried to stop myself and I couldn't. That's so stupid.
Antonio, I've seen lots of great emojis. People are laughing out there. So
that's good. It's all coming from like my cousin. I told him to just give me. So yeah, that's a great question. Monardella viosa. I'm gonna give you, let's say 5. Monardella viosa. That's a coyote mint. I know for a fact that's been used for bitters. I'm gonna throw out a few that are maybe a little bit more unique. Artemisia tridentata, which is the Great Basin sagebrush. I love the smell. As Great Basin sage, there's a little bit of history that maybe that is a plant that was more commonly used as white sage smudge sticks, as opposed to white sage that's used now. More across, because you find Artemisia tridentata everywhere up in Reno, out to the Great Basin. But I like that smell, that intensity. I think would be a very good bitter. Artemisia californica, I'm not sure how that would work, but that's California sagebrush. I'm not sure if that would work as a bitter. We could use Salvia mellifera, would probably be the best for the sages, and that's black sage. I don't think I would try Cleveland sage, but I would definitely try that black sage. And then give me a minute or two as I talk to other people. I'm sure other stuff will come up, but so there's a bunch of Monardellas. So yeah, okay, I'm gonna take that back. Forget a minute or two. So Monardella viosa is the easiest to find, but Monardella odorotissima, just in the name odor, that is such an intense smell. It's almost overwhelming how minty that is. So I would try both of those, because you're gonna find different, and I know in bitters, it's the details that matter, right? And there's way different details in each of those smells. The viosa is like a little bit more clean, and the odorotissima is like in your face, right? And then the artemisia I think would work. The black sage would work. I don't think hummingbird sage would work. I think black sage, that would be the one I would start with. That's such a clean, crisp smell. I think that would be a very good flavor. And we used to make lemonade out of it at Rancho Santa Ana.
Ooh, that sounds
like,
good.
Yeah, like sage lemonade.
Someone's mentioning elderberry flowers as something to use in liqueurs.
Okay. Oh yeah, I've heard it used like as in a cordial. Like someone makes a cordial. I don't know what. I'm just gonna write that down for me using it. I don't know what a cordial is. What the hell's a cordial? I don't know what a cordial is, but I do see that in the literature that there are elderflower cordials. I'm not sure what that is.
Okay. Well, that list was great. I'm sure that was very helpful.
Are you talking about my list of like mispronouncements or the?
Both.
Okay,
yeah,
perfect.
Yeah. So I had 2 questions about allium. So someone was asking, is it the same thing as society garlic? It's separate.
No, society garlic's different. That's a non-native. Society garlic is, I'm such a bad horticulturist. I used to know what society garlic, I think society garlic is just that plant that grows everywhere.
Yeah.
It's not native. I think it might be like a little invasive, but not really. I've never tried using society garlic. So be careful of stuff that has garlic in the name or just anything in the name, like in assuming that it's edible, right? Like people do that with coffee berry. They think our native plant coffee berry is edible, and it is edible if you want to die. Anything's edible, but the real question is, can I survive after I eat it? So I would be very careful about eating society garlic. Um, I have never heard of anybody eating, but I haven't really paid attention. But no, I don't even know that society garlic is an allium, which is what you want to look for. ALLIUM. If you can see that it's an allium, then that's in the onion family, and then it may be edible, but you still need to do your homework.
Great. Okay. And so, what are your favorite corms or bulbs to grow in homes for food?
Yeah. So the Tritolea ixoides. Let me go back on this. That one has been fairly easy to grow. And I just know because of the experience that we've had at Rancho, it was in a shady area, and then an oak tree died there and it became full sun, and the plant was still there. I think the patch has died down now, but it was a patch that was being watered. And this is the thing with those corms of those bulbs, they really need to go dormant. So I'm just gonna have three for whoever asked this. So this Tritolea, and this is a really good potato, I'm telling you. I just don't promote it because it's very hard to find. And if they can be, if you keep them next to a lawn or water too much, they can rot out. But this one, if you can keep it dry, water just only every 14 days or whatever. This is a super tasty, small, about quarter size potato, literally a potato. And then the two onions that I think are the easiest and that are most accessible, that I've had the most success with, are the single leaf onion, the Allium unifolium, and then the red skin onion, which is Allium hematichiton. And just growing those two would give you a way different flavor experience, because the Allium unifolium is very mild. It's kind of chivy. It has the onion flavor, but it's not overwhelming. The Allium hematichiton is spicy. That thing tastes like spicy garlic. It is intense. So usually, if you're going to use it like in a recipe that calls for garlic, you would use probably less of it because it's so intense. But I think with those are the three that I have the most experience with and have been the easiest to grow and to use.
Okay, thanks. What about California poppy? Is any part of the plant edible?
Yes, remember that's the wrong question to ask. Is any part of it survivable after I eat it? I have no, that's a good question. I have no idea. I really don't know. I have no clue. I don't remember hearing that the seed is edible, and I can't imagine that leaf would be any good. But again, tell your relatives and your loved ones that you're gonna eat it. Have your emergency hospital card on file, and then try it. And if we don't see you at the next class, we know what happened.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Chia Cafe Collective?
Yes. And before I do, I have to. So they lost a very, very good, a huge part of that collective recently. Barbara Drake passed away. She was one of the founders of Chia Cafe, and I know Naomi knew her pretty decently. She was a rock. She was amazing. You can't talk about Chia Cafe without talking about Barbara Drake. She was amazing. So that being said, that she has left us, unfortunately, at least her physical body. The work that they've done for decades is a group of Native folks in Southern California from different tribal origins, and a group of non-Native folks. There's some folks who are Mexicanos or Chicanos. There's some white folks. It's a really cool group of people. There's no place that you can meet to go see them. But they did finally start putting out books. So you can find, they published a book called the Chia Cafe Cookbook, I believe. It's a really cool book that has the mesquite cookie cookbook, or the recipe in there. It has the mesquite pancakes. It has nettles. It has chia. And it has a lot of tradition in there too. So I don't like to talk about the traditions. I have my own traditions, but I don't want to bring those up. But they have a lot of tradition with their stuff. So half of the book, I would say, is stories and traditions of the food. And then there's recipes and stuff too. So the other great part of Chia Cafe, or there's so many good parts, is they're affiliated with a lot of folks. And one of the Chia Cafe members is a really good photographer. So Deborah Small, and you can go to her blog, Deborah Small blog, and you can see some of the pictures of them going with native folks in Baja, harvesting chia here in California, some really cool stuff. So just those two things, if you guys were to look at that book and hopefully buy it if they still have it. I think Rancho may have been selling it at one time. And if not, just go to Deborah Small's blog and check out, you just get lost in the pictures. She's a great photographer. And, you know, they helped us. They were the biggest group to help us do that Native Food Symposium. I don't think you were around for it, Kristen. It was 2015. We did a native food like conference, a 2-day conference at Rancho. You know, 200 people there. We had the Parkers from Yosemite, like doing acorn preparation. It was just so cool. So many, it was so fun. And we hope, me and Naomi always talk about doing something else like that. We wanted to have another conference, 1 or 2 days where the first day is like talks and, you know, just stories. And the second day is food. It was all food tastings. We had like all these food booths. I don't know if anybody here was in it, who was in the class, but you know, we had the Cleveland sage pesto, we had acorn soup. There was all sorts of just cool stuff, popcorn. Anyways, we hope to do something like that eventually. Kind of COVID, just kind of, we haven't thought about it since COVID, but we hope to do it soon.
Right. People are really hoping that you do organize another one. So
Right on.
yeah.
It was fun.
There's a lot of more questions. I mean, we're kind of at a bit past our time.
So let me tell you this, Kristen. I'm cool to hang out however long you can. I know you have a time limit. So and then people have my email there too, so they can always throw an email. It'll probably take me about a week to get back to them. But I can, you know, I could, they can feel free to email me, and, you know, I could address any questions they might have that didn't get answered.
Okay, well, why don't we take like 2 more, and then yeah, if you have your question to get answered, you can reach out to Antonio through his email.
Nice.
And I'll be sending out that follow-up email after the class with the references and resources that he mentioned all throughout this wonderful, entertaining, hilarious talk. So let's take a couple more questions. Let's see. Can you tell us a little bit more about quailbush? You kind of mentioned it, but yeah.
So quailbush, they sell it at G&N at the nursery there. They have a clone, so they have a cutting, right? It's a copy. They're calling it Naomi, which has nothing to do with our Naomi or Rancho's Naomi. Our Naomi, who the hell am I? She's our Naomi, right? She's the native plant world's Naomi. I don't know where that name came from, but it's a female. So here's how I like to use Atriplex. I've seen and read about people using it for leaves. I do not like using it for leaves. I think they're too bitter. They don't have a good enough taste, and I figured out how to cook it out of there. Even though when we were speaking of Barbara, rest in peace, when we were at her house one time, they were frying large leaves of Atriplex lentiformis, which were pretty good. Those were pretty good. And so it's related to amaranth. Amaranth greens are edible. It's related to a lot of plants that their leaves are edible. And so you're safe eating them. I just don't really like the greens. Where I learned to eat them is from a book called Tending the Wild. And I read that there was some folks, native folks, who eat, and at one time were eating quailbush, the seed. And I searched around, I asked the native folks that I know, like, how do you eat quailbush? And no one that I know of eats quailbush. But it's related, and then this is where my farming background comes from. It's related to quinoa, it's related to amaranth. And so I thought there was something there. So I just went and harvested some of the fruits. It's so easy to harvest, right? You can just pull them off. And I started messing with them, baking them, cooking them, frying them. And the only thing that's worked for me is to take the water to a fast boil and then simmer it for about 20 to 30 minutes. They're really tough at first. So if you can figure out how to cook it, it might take you a few times. You can have this almost like a quinoa type grain. And like I said, it's related to quinoa. But that can take a little experimenting. The easiest way that most people that I've shown use it is taking that same harvested fruit. And so you just have handfuls of it, and you heat up a pan and you throw just one layer of it, and you just keep the pan moving for about 30 or 40 seconds, and you'll smell it. It'll start to have that slightly burnt smell and the salty smell. It's so darn good. But I love it because it's such a pretty plant. The flower is not very pretty, but the plant itself is gorgeous. It's this soft gray with a little bit of green in it, and it's so easy to grow. You can grow it in Bakersfield. You can grow it next to the coast with salt spray. So it's a very adaptable plant. I really don't know why people don't use it more. Maybe because it doesn't have an attractive flower and people are always looking for flowers. But if you can get past the plant, I didn't know. Okay, that's number 11. If you get past the idea that it's not going to have a sexy flower, but it's just going to look good all year, you can go to it August, it looks good. You can go to December, it looks good. You can go to it in March, it looks good. It's a backbone plant. It's a very, very solid plant. But again, you need to have the male and the female to produce the fruit. And if you can't do that, then you probably just want to buy the seed. And the best place to buy it is probably SNS seed from Carpinteria, to buy large amounts of it.
Great, thank you. And so you kind of touched on it when you mentioned the Native Food Symposium about acorns. Can you touch on like the use of acorns?
Nope. I don't mean any disrespect, but I really am. So I'm just gonna be cut and dry. I don't have the time to do acorns. I'm so impatient. I'm such a bad representative of long-term native foods, which is what some of this takes. And the whole point of this class is to get folks interested in easy to use acorns. Acorns are not hard to use, but they take time and you got to watch, mostly because our acorns have too many tannins. They're very bitter. They're not super edible when they first come off the tree. And it's not that hard. There's a lot of people doing it. You can do it in your fridge. You just have to rinse them and you set them in water, rinse the water, or set them under a sink and just keep rinsing them. There's different methods of doing them. But it's been years since I tried. Yeah, I'm a bad representative for acorn. But I think it's a really cool food that people way better than me are doing, either traditionally, like the Parkers, or like new kind of, I'm gonna say like hipster, like forager. There's some really cool stuff out there that I'm not even gonna try to talk about because I've never tried, or I haven't tried in years.
Oh, so just two things that you referenced before we go, I think. So you listed Alasta Brewery in the resource page. Do they use native plants in their beer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I used to say I lost my sobriety at Alasta Brewery because they have some cool beers. So they supplied beer, I think for that symposium we had. So they have a Hummingbird Sage beer and they have a Cleveland Sage beer. And the Cleveland Sage beer, the last time I checked, which is about a year and a half ago, they have on tap like all the time. It's one that they always produce. And the Hummingbird Sage beer was one that they were kind of messing with, that maybe was like more seasonal, or maybe like they were just experimenting with. But that Cleveland Sage beer was there. You could just go in and get it, which is pretty cool.
Nice.
And I think they're in like West Covina.
Okay, cool. So local to the garden.
Yeah. They used to do a lot of work with the garden. I don't know if they still do. I think they might.
And then just you mentioned Deborah Small's blog. Do you know the name of it? Like, or something?
Deborah, yeah, it's called Deborah Small's blog. I'm just kidding. I think you just type in Deborah Small. I think it's WordPress. It's a WordPress blog. So, but honestly, if you just type in Deborah Small, like Chia Cafe, and her blog will come right up.
Great.
I'll try to do it right now.
Well, Antonio, this was amazing. I see in the chat, everyone is really appreciating it. Lots of information, lots of, you're very knowledgeable about this. And there was a lot of great emojis in there too. So
nice.
Yeah.
Somebody was awake. That's cool.
So thank you so much, Antonio. This was amazing.
Thanks for hanging out, Kristen. I appreciate you hanging out for a little longer. Thank you.
Of course, this was great. So
don't tell Naomi I was talking about her so much.
Well, I can't promise, but we'll see.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get an email on Monday.
Yeah. To everyone, thank you for joining us today. It's wonderful to have such a large group of people joining us from all over California, it seemed earlier on. And like I mentioned, I'm going to be sending, resources to you all, but you'll have Antonio's email if your question didn't quite get answered. There was a lot of great questions out there, so we hope that you got a lot out of this. And the recording should be up, I believe, like I typically have it up by the end of the day today, but if not, definitely the end of the day on Monday. So you can check back on that at calbg.org. So with that, I think that's it. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Antonio.
All right, Kristen. You guys take care. Thank you.
Yeah, take care, everyone.